Hello everyone, this is Ukraine today. Putin may attack one of the European countries. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy shocked a Guardian journalist with this statement. Ukrainian soldiers are fiercely fighting and counterattacking. The heaviest battles continue near Pokrovsk and Kupyansk. Huge losses in Russia's tank fleet. The Kremlin has already lost almost 11,500 combat vehicles in its full-scale war against Ukraine. Ukrainian drones once again struck strategic energy and military facilities in Russian cities. How long will the Kremlin subjects support the war without electricity, heating and fuel? Alexander Lukashenko is engaging in racketeering. The dictator threatened to seize all Lithuanian trucks blocked on his border. We will talk about all this in next. It's November 10th. My name is Sima Shalenka. Let's start. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. In the comments, please tell us the city and country you're watching from and whether you support Ukraine in our struggle against the occupiers. It's very important for us. Putin has no success on the Ukrainian fronts. In his attempt to calm society wound up by war propaganda, he may launch an attack on a European country at any moment.
I was asked, could it be that he will start somewhere else without finishing the war in Ukraine? I think so.
In an interview with The Guardian, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that Putin needs at least some kind of victory and he may try to achieve it in another quick and easy war against a much weaker opponent.
I believe we should forget about this widespread European skepticism that Putin first wants to occupy Ukraine and then move on somewhere else. He could do both at the same time.
Meanwhile, in the last 24 hours alone, Russia lost more than 1,000 soldiers in its war against Ukraine. The biggest losses were near Pokrovsk. The city holds there is no encirclement of the Ukrainian forces. Our defenders continue to resist the enemy. More details in our frontline report.
The Russian army is loosening its grip. The advance of the occupying forces in the Pokrovsk direction has somewhat slowed down. This is stated in the latest report from the Institute for the Study of War. However, analysts emphasize that this situation is temporary. Right now, the enemy is actively redeploying reserves and concentrating forces in this sector of the front. And very soon, assaults and attacks may resume with renewed force.
At least up to half of the enemy's main forces are concentrated right here. The enemy's efforts, even though the situation is no less difficult in other directions.
In recent days, the Russians have also made gains in the area of Mirnohrad, east of Pokrovsk. Russian military bloggers are talking about the capture of western Rivne and most of Krasny Lyman. There is evidence that the Russians are breaking through toward the Pokrovsk-Dobropilia highway in eastern Pokrovsk. However, our defenders are holding their positions.
The balance of forces is changing because the enemy is being crushed there. Overall, by and large, the task of Ukraine's defense forces is to inflict maximum damage on the armies advancing toward Pokrovsk.
According to some military observers, part of the Pokrovsk territory has become a so-called gray zone, with control shifting back and forth.
It's more like a vinaigrette, if you will. Here it's red, here it's black, here it's white, and the situation changes quite frequently, every single hour, but the trend remains the same. When the forces of the Second Army approached from the southwest, they were unable to advance into the city. They waited for the 51st Army to encircle the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration from the north. But here, the 51st Army, perhaps feeling overconfident, decided to take on far more than they could realistically handle.
So now the occupiers are not trying to gain a foothold in Pokrovsk itself. The enemy wants to break through the city to its northern outskirts. Serhiy Okishev, 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces. Russian troops are somewhat slowing down their offensive operations in the Pokrovsk direction, waiting for reinforcements, and are trying to establish defenses and expand logistics to South Pokrovsk. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, there have been at least 73 Russian assaults in the Pokrovsk direction over the past day. At this very moment, fighting is taking place near Vladimirovka, Fedorovka, Nikanorovka, Krasny Liman, Orekovo and Filial. Unable to boast of other achievements, the soldiers of the Kremlin's army resort to their favorite tactic, terror. For example, Russian drone operators have once again tried to destroy the Ukrainian flag in Kramatorsk. In other words, to spite the Ukrainian armed forces in any way they can. But this time, our flag turned out to be much quicker than yet another Russian drone operator. As a result, frustrated by his failure, the occupier simply smashed his FPV drone against the ground. After watching videos like this, you can't help but ask, what kind of idiots are working there? The answer is just the usual kind.
This one doesn't want to move at all. It's just standing its ground.
After horses and donkeys, the occupiers are now actively enlisting sheep and rams into service. It's worth noting that the Russian Ministry of Defense at least gives the animals bulletproof vests, which for many contract soldiers is an unaffordable luxury. However, even so, unlike Russians, the animals refuse to willingly go to slaughter.
Come on, go. They're waiting for you over there, the fighters. That's it. There you go, walk slowly. Come on. Combat unit.
The Russian army is so short on soldiers that they're not only conscripting sheep, but circus performers too.
My backstory is that I was originally an acrobat in the circus. Then after some unfortunately serious falls, I basically ended my career and was mobilized.
In the circus, a disabled person turned out to be useless to anyone, but for meat assaults, he was a perfect fit. By the way, the acrobat was given a matching team as partners.
So in our group, there was me, the acrobat, a life safety and social studies teacher, an altar boy, and an auto mechanic. And with this kind of team, that's probably how we lived.
And all of this, according to Putin, is the second army in the world. But really, why be surprised by circus performers and sheep at the front when even Russian soldiers are treated like cattle by their own generals, sold and traded literally by weight?
You see, the Ministry of Defense recruits people, gives them dog tags and weapons, and then it turns out they don't exist. So selling them, what's the problem? They never existed and still don't.
In the Zaporizhzhia direction, commanders openly sell their refuseniks into forced labor to collaborators. Instead of legally processing their refusal or sending them to disciplinary units, those unwilling to take part in the meat grinder assaults are listed as missing, detained, and handed over for unpaid forced labor throughout the Zaporizhzhia region. For this, commanders receive substantial sums of money from the collaborators. Such Russian refuseniks are already being found en masse at factories and construction sites in Melitopol and Berdyansk.
They're not even cannon fodder, they're not even serfs. They're just, I don't know, like people trading chickens. And even then, people usually have more sympathy for the chickens.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Revenge is a dish to be served for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Ukrainian naval drones once again attacked the port of Tuapse in the Krasnodar region on the Black Sea. Besides hitting the pier, remotely controlled boats damaged a Russian military ship. And in the Rostov region, Ukrainian drones struck a railway traction substation and its control point. This year, Ukraine's defense forces have damaged and destroyed a record number of Russian oil refineries. Drivers across the Russian Federation are feeling the consequences. Ukraine's drone sanctions are intensifying, so Russians who adore Putin and support his war should prepare to even greater problems, unlike their crazy king.
Ukrainian armed forces' attacks on Russian oil refineries are setting new records in both range and frequency. We are talking about a legitimate target.
We are specifically talking about a lawful target. Oil extraction and refining make up 90% of Russia's defense budget. These are dirty oil rubles with which the enemy is killing us. If we look at the statistics for September and October of this year, that's 20 targets. Among them are 6 oil refineries, 2 oil terminals, 3 oil depots, and 9 oil pumping stations.
At the beginning of November 2025, Ukraine had carried out 111 strikes on oil depots and refineries in Russia. For comparison, throughout all of 2024, there were 94 such incidents. As a result, Russia is facing enormous problems with oil refining volumes as well as a fuel shortage and a shortage of gasoline on the domestic market.
This has led to a 20% deficit in petroleum products on the domestic market and the idling of 37% of oil refining capacity, as well as fuel shortages in 57 regions of the Russian Federation and a ban on gasoline exports until the end of this year.
Federal Highway M12 Moscow-Kazan, the toll road. There is only one gas station every 150 kilometers. At each gas station, there are lines of cars stretching 1.5 to 2 kilometers just to fill up. I'll show you what this looks like now, and when we'll actually be able to refuel is anyone's guess. I counted 130 cars ahead of us.
But it's not just about the quantity, it's also about the quality. The range of strikes on Russian oil refineries has almost doubled. Last year, the farthest target was the Salavat refinery in Bashkortostan, about 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. On October 6, 2025, Ukrainian drones reached the Tyumen refinery, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. According to calculations by journalists from the publication Vertka, the effectiveness of Ukrainian drone strikes is 85%. Out of 250 strikes since the start of the full-scale war, 213 have been successful. Many facilities, especially in southern Russia, have been attacked repeatedly. For example, the Ryazan, Volgograd and Ilsky refineries have each been attacked 10 times. For
that, in order to somehow put this war into a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to disrupt their logistics and suppress their aviation. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at Russia's military-industrial enterprises and energy system.
During the war, Ukraine first launched from scratch and then significantly ramped up the production of long-range and rocket drones. Russian oil refineries are being terrorized by UAVs such as Lyuty, Polyanitsia, Peklo and FP-1. Drones costing just a few $1,000s are causing damage to the Russian budget amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars. Look guys, I want you to notice that's actually the 7th hit that's burning right now, just as we expected. It's really happening and you can see it clearly. That's the 7th drone that just arrived. At the same time, following the drones, Ukraine is also ramping up mass production of long-range missiles. According to experts, if Ukraine uses cruise missiles like the Flamingo with a range of 3,000 kilometers and a 1,000-kilogram warhead, there will be nothing left of the Russian oil refineries.
If the strike hits the oil refinery, it will be impossible to restore that refinery. In other words, if before when a drone hit you could replace the damaged parts with spares in a few weeks or a month, here that's it, everything will be destroyed to the ground. The entire distillation column will be completely destroyed. And after 2 pairs of such missiles, all that will remain of the refinery are memories.
The trend is such that going forward, there will be more and more strikes, while gasoline and other fuels in Russia will become increasingly scarce.
Huge tank losses in the Russian army. The Kremlin has already lost more than 11,300 combat vehicles in its full-scale war against Ukraine. At the same time, Russian defense industry manufacturers are facing severe financial difficulties. The situation at Uralvagonzavod, the country's key tank producer, has become critically alarming. More in our report.
We must not only maintain pace with the global economy, but also strive to further outpace its growth by unlocking our own potential. In order to achieve this, we need to be proactive and innovative.
But in Russia, there is neither growth nor potential to be seen. In particular, even the most resilient are starting to go under. For example, the Russian military giant Uralvagonzavod, which produces armored vehicles and enjoys all the privileges of the defense industry, is unable to cope and is falling apart at the seams.
What is the plant's management doing? They don't formally lay people off, but instead switch them to a 4-day work week, which means a 20% pay cut. or a 3-day work week with a 40% reduction in salary. This is exactly the situation that's happening, but even that is no longer helping. And that stage has already passed. According to the latest statistics, about 250,000 people in Russia have been working like this recently.
And reducing shifts to a minimum doesn't work anymore. Layoffs are looming at the enterprise that is the flagship of Russian tank manufacturing. This was reported by the Russian publication E1. In some departments, up to 50% of the staff is planned to be laid off. And across the entire enterprise, 1 in 10 employees will lose their job.
Previously, it was kind of like this. Civilian production might not have been very profitable, but there was a lot of money for military production, and that somehow made up for it. But now it seems even spending on military products is being cut. And it seems that Ralvagon's profits from military contracts can't cover the losses from the civilian sector. That's why they're now going to lay off people in the civilian production division, reportedly about 10%.
Experts explain that the reason for all this is the dramatic decline of the Russian economy. Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, which are depriving Russia of millions in petrodollars, Western sanctions, and increased pressure from the US on the Russian oil industry, have already led to a situation where even the negative forecasts for the economy are too optimistic. It will get even worse.
The negative forecast from the central bank, let me remind you, is a GDP drop of 2.5 to 3.5%, inflation at 12%, and an interest rate of 20%. In other words, they'll have to raise the rate back up to 20% next year. And that's their negative forecast. A scenario that I don't consider negative, but rather what is actually happening right now. That's the thing. The accumulated problems are just coming up every single day, and they don't allow the central bank to maintain the scenario they consider manageable.
The situation has escalated to the point where the economic decline in Russia has to be acknowledged publicly.
Question. Is that enough? Is this what we wanted?
In fact, even according to official data, the recession has already affected 19 out of 24 sectors of the Russian economy. Moreover, they're even starting to have problems with defense industry enterprises. If these enterprises are already experiencing non-payments, not getting paid from the budget, and the work week is being reduced. For example, Uralvagonzavod, this means their funding was cut, well, about 3 months ago. So these processes are actually happening.
At the same time, the funniest thing is that in Russia, they've already figured out how to present this information to the higher-ups. It's all in the spirit of negative growth and unsuccessful successes. So now they openly talk about the economic decline, while adding that there was such an unprecedented boom before that it simply couldn't last forever. And now we're seeing a downturn.
That's their strategy. To say, no, there's no recession, no economic decline. Then to release a statement saying that, yes, most likely there will be an economic downturn in the fourth quarter. And to back all of this up with a bunch of disclaimers.
The solution suggested itself to once again revise the budget draft, naturally in the direction of negative growth.
We are holding a whole series of meetings on the framework of the country's main financial document, its primary priority. And
the priority, as before, remains the war, so analysts do not recommend expecting any improvements. And if the cuts have already affected the industrial giants of the military-industrial complex, then all enterprises in the country, including private ones, are next in line.
Lukashenko is engaged in restoration. The potato Caesar has blocked more than 1,000 Lithuanian trucks on the border and refuses to let them leave. By his personal order, the trucks were placed under guard and drivers were forced to pay 120 euros per day for parking. Lithuania asked Minsk to temporarily open the checkpoint to evacuate the vehicles, and the answer was refusal. Moreover, Lukashenko cynically promised that if the trucks won't be removed soon, he will seize them. According to transport companies, more than 1,100 trucks are currently stuck at the Belarusian border. That's all for now. Thank you for staying with us. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to like the video so more people learn the truth. And please write in the comments from which country you're watching and whether you support us in our struggle. See you next time, and glory to Ukraine.